All right. Okay. So, um, I am going to make this stage about um, the topic of determinism and free will. Um, for some, this is a controversial topic in philosophy, and for some people, they think this should not even be a discussion. Others, others would say that you know it's a given, and just depending on what side of the fence you're on. And especially like if you're on the side of the fence that where you view free will to be loaded language and kind of an asinine term, which some people are on that side of the fence, um, you're going to see the whole issue as a non-issue, something that shouldn't even be as much of a big deal as what it is. However, the reason it is a big deal is because a lot of people are on the other side of the fence, and free will and determinism, this issue, spans across many different areas of philosophy. For example, usually a person's position on free will and determinism is going to be grounded in their metaphysics or ontology, usually. So, if you're a materialist, you're probably going to obviously lean towards some kind of determinism. And there are many other different reasons that people might ground their determinism. And, just to stay true to stereotypes and tropes, if you're a theist who believes there's some kind of soul, you're typically going to think that there's free will. However, both of these horns of the dilemma are not always justified by these caricatures and tropes which I've listed. So, um, so, so the reason it is such a significant issue, even if you are of the view that it should be a non-issue, is because it often starts in someone's metaphysics and ontology and extends all the way into ethics and our politics. Oh, hey, what's up, Detroyer? How's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. How are you?
Pretty good. So, I want
Go on.
what?
I was just saying I don't want to interrupt. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, well, so this is you can okay, so I wanted to the way I wanted to arrange the stage was I would talk about the subject matter, and anyone who wants to sort of interject and talk about it can. So where I was going with this was, you know, free will and determinism, it is this very important topic in philosophy, even if you are maybe of the view that I am, where I think free will is a bunch of loaded language. And frankly, wish we didn't always have to talk about it, but it is significant because people ground this in their metaphysics and ontology, and then they extend it all the way into ethics and morality, which affects, politics and, the rest of the story after that. So, and then, uh, so what are do you have anything to say on the topic? What are your views on free will, determinism, its nuances, etc.?
Yeah, I think one place to start would be to on what you were saying there is that even if you think, as I'm inclined to, that a lot of the disputes in this area are largely semantic, their term has a place and is like conceptually connected to a lot of other things, even outside of philosophy. So people use it when talking about, I don't know, political freedom, just holding people responsible for things. It's a common notion that enters into a lot of normative discussions as well as non-normative ones. And so even if we think that on closer analysis, um, the full concept is vague and under underdetermined or that is being used in a variety of imprecise ways, or even precise but inconsistent ways, among philosophers and others. There's still a sort of practical question like, well, what are we going to do with this term given how it's already embedded in a lot of discourse? Right, so I don't know if you want to say anything on that. I could kind of ramble on about some of those things, but you kind of get what I'm saying about some of that stuff.
Yeah. Yes. So there. Yeah. Even if you like I'm inclined, and like what you mentioned, you are, even if you think that maybe it's some vague terminology, it is of great significance because it works its way into, like you said, legal situations that have real consequences. So it has, it's something that it's probably not an issue that's smart to ignore, and we have to know how to talk about it. Um, and then there's the added complication of not all species of free will are libertarian free will. Now, do you have anything to say about the variation of on that? Detroyer, you there? Okay. So yeah, so while the while your average theist may hold to some kind of libertarian free will, which is typically more talking about some agent that is spontaneously, you know, the origin of actions. They don't. There are softer versions than that, and there are softer versions of determinism. Lots of like your average materialist or identity theorist might have this idea of it's all of our actions are a series of, I don't know, whatever, a series of domino effects caused by chemistry or whatever. Um, and and so yeah, and so there are all these variations uh, of where we can put the starting point of I guess the metaphysics or the ontology that we ground these two ideas in. And then there's the third option that compatibilists who say that they are not exclusive. Um, and so yeah, that kind of paints more or less the picture. Detroyer, are you still here? I have a question. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. It's fine. Um, if you are having audio issues, I'll just move you to the audience, and you can come back if you want. So, um,
Wait, were you not able to hear me?
no, I didn't hear anything you said. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Weird. I don't know why.
so yeah. So like at one point I asked you uh, if you have anything to say on the distinction between libertarian free will and some of these softer versions. And I didn't hear you say anything after that. So
Yeah. Well, um, it's funny because you'll the dispute is set up as though, okay, um, we have this notion, quote unquote, free will, and then we're asking whether that, whatever it is consistent with determinism, right? Is it possible to have free choices yet be determined in some respect? Um, and that the presumption there for the dispute to be substantive is that people who have opposing views nevertheless share this notion of free will and are saying different things about it. And uh, I mean, that might be the case for some people. I'm less convinced, though. I think, for the general case, I think, at least among philosophers who write on this, um, I I'm not convinced that there is this quote unquote general notion of free will that's like shared by most people engaging that sort of discourse. And two, it seems likely to me that people are tying different things to their notion of quote unquote free will. I mean, when I um, when I think about free will, I think kind of tied to my ideas about deliberation and then on the basis of deliberation, willed action, something like that. And if I'm thinking about it that way, there's nothing about determinism or indeterminism that is like relevant to that definition. And so if that's how I'm thinking about free will, then yeah, of course I'm going to be a compatibilist. That has nothing to do with free will. It's just relevant. But on the other hand, if someone's tying something like, um, they have to be the ultimate source of their action. There can't be some prior cause of um, them choosing a particular way or something like that. Or they're thinking that in making a choice, um, it must have been possible in some respect for them to refrain from making that choice or to have made another. So those you could think of those two notions as source and leeway incompatibilism respectively. And um, if you take that latter approach, and you tie that to your notion of free will, that you must have, in some sense, been able to choose the other something else, or not, or refrain from making the choice that you did, you're going to be a sort of incompatibilist. And if you think you nevertheless have free will, then you'll be a libertarian, under the normal sort of construal of the views. And uh, I don't think there's really a lot more to say, right? Because it's not like the person who says, "Oh, this sort of um, leeway constraint is a requirement of free will," and the person like me who says, "By free will, I'm just talking about something in terms of deliberative and willed action." Um, there's not, we don't have this common notion, and there's no way to make it such that we have the same notion such that there be a substantive dispute here. I would say under their notion that's tied to this and such in that way, um, you know that would be incompatible with determinism. Under the notion that I'm using, it is compatible, and we're not using the same notion. And I would want to also add that I think for most people who talk about free will, um, you talked about, I think you mentioned something about the average theist is probably going to be a libertarian. I'm not convinced. I think the average theist probably, while they might talk about free will and they might, um, attribute to people free choice or say of some choice that they made that it was freely done, I don't think they have, in general, um, a very specific or determinate view of what exactly that entails. I certainly don't think, in the average case, they're going to commit to something um, as specific as a view like libertarianism or compatibilism. So, but that's an empirical question. And I don't like claim to have much on that. It's just a sense
Yeah,
of
let me
folk
let me
discourse.
elaborate.
So, if you want to
Yeah,
comment on that, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm speaking when I say that about theists. I'm really just speaking on anecdotes. So, I mean, I'm not going to try too hard to defend that. Maybe your anecdotes are different, but I agree that if they're pressed on their free will, they're typically not going to have something that is very specifically defined. So yeah, maybe you would say it doesn't meet the criteria or fit the bill perfectly for libertarian free will, but they're usually not determinists. And they will usually say that their notion of free will is not compatible with determinism. I think is,
I
or maybe not. Maybe I mean, yeah, maybe not. I can't speak for all of them, but yeah. So, uh, uh,
yes, I know there have been some studies on this. I don't know specifically about studies focusing on like religious people and their views, uh, but I'm trying to think. I think probably something similar going on here, and sort of. Um, I don't want to sound too much like Lance Bush, but a wide range of um, philosophical issues as they're thought by quote unquote folk, right? Folk in this context just meaning not people that have studied this kind of philosophically.
Yeah.
Um, so, and that includes not just professional philosophers, but even people like us that have some familiarity with the philosophical literature, if whatever. So I remember thinking it wasn't so conclusive, but whatever, it doesn't matter. If it turns out that the majority of theists, or at least more theists than non-theists, which I wouldn't doubt, uh, are have a view of free will that's more libertarian, or at
Yeah.
least incompatibilist. That wouldn't surprise me. I think that I would still kind of be suspicious of the claim that like the average theist has a sort of view like that, if that makes sense. But um, yeah, I don't know. So I guess did you have anything?
Yeah.
You understand what I was saying though about
Yeah. Well, I want to comment a little bit.
semantic issue? Yeah.
I want to comment a little bit about what you said on. It sounds like there are scenarios where you are sympathetic towards compatibilism, possibly, right? Um,
Well,
you know,
there are
just
senses of the
situationally speaking, right?
there are there are occasions where it seems like the term free will seems like suitable terminology in the sense that um, when I talk about someone deliberating over some choice, reaching a decision on the basis of that deliberation, and then acting on the basis of that decision, um, that is the sort of thing that I would call, usually anyway, a kind of free choice, right? That's the kind of terminology I would use to describe what happened there. You don't have to use that terminology. You might say, oh, well, whether that counted as a genuine free choice depends on whether these other features were in place. They had this genuine alternative possibilities, or there wasn't some prior cause of their choice. You could say that, and you would just be using the term in another way than I am. Um, but for my purposes, and I think for a lot of especially informal discourse, this seems like perfectly sensible. And if I was in some like linguistic community in which that wasn't perfectly sensible, right? People just never use the terms in that way or something like that. Okay, then I would, uh, to some extent, adopt the common vocabulary, but I might want a term for that sort of action because that's something I think about and is relevant to a lot of discourse actions that are based on deliberations and so on in that way. So if you don't want to call it free will or free choice, I mean, whatever. I mean, um, that's not necessarily a substantive dispute. That's just a dispute over how to use that label.
Yeah. Um, I've run across determinists who are so convicted and kind of, you know, radical in my opinion, that they, even if you downgrade the terminology of free will just to choice, they don't like the idea of an agent with a choice that originates from that agent. Um, so uh, I guess this is where I will since we've sort of painted a small, definitely non-exhaustive picture of what the issue is. I'll say what my opinion is on this issue, and and I guess I guess what I'll say is that I don't think the metaphysics or the ontology as a grounding for free will and determinism is always relevant. And this is where I think I'm going to agree with you about the terminology being useful in some cases. So let's say that there was this world of domino butterfly effect causes where there's always some prior cause to everything that I'm doing, but then the next question is, are all of them always relevant? Probably not. In order to talk about certain things in certain scenarios, even if there's some prior cause to someone's actions, it is only relevant to talk about certain results of certain causes. And sometimes, since we have to truncate, all these infinite or really long causes, sometimes that it might leave the starting point as an agent being the origin of certain actions. Other times, it might be relevant to examine prior causes that led to that agent um, uh, and the resulting actions. And I would say the determining factor is the context, the question
I,
we're trying to answer, or the problems we're trying to solve.
yeah,
And
I
and
agree with that.
yeah, and I'll say one last thing. This filters out the noise of trying to ground it in metaphysics and trying to make the case that, oh, is it materialism? Is it identity theory? Is it something else? This makes it more abstract and makes all of that less relevant, in my opinion, and simplifies the issue. But that's my view on this.
Yeah, I might wonder how, what sense it simplifies it. But on the first thing about how the sort of appropriate response regarding, which sort of facts we would appeal to in order to answer some question like why a particular person performed a particular action, is going to depend on exactly what sort of question we're answering. So, like, um, if you ask me why did I um, perform action A, and I said, well, the initial conditions of the universe and the laws of nature, that might not be the sort of answer that you're looking for. You're looking for something in terms of perhaps more immediate causes or intentional states that I had um, that preceded the action that I took. Why did I choose A? Well, um, okay, there's certain facts about the world that made A accessible to me, and I, deliberated, and that's the action that I came to on the basis of that deliberation. If it turns out that all those, you know, events had prior determining causes, okay, but those weren't the facts you were presumably looking for me to explain or provide when you asked that question. And what facts you're looking would satisfy your question. It's going to depend on the context.
Yeah, yeah, because if we were hard, very dogmatic determinists and we were discussing, I guess, this Ukraine stuff, we could say, well, actually, Putin has no agency. The real cause of the invasion of Ukraine is the fact that the Big Bang happened, and this universe is here the way we see it. Even if that is true, that is noise and of little relevance. So we have to filter that out and we have to refine it. And sometimes that refinement process might lead to us only deciding that a certain agent that engaged in certain actions are what is relevant in what we're talking about. So yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. And so in this view, I mean, at the end of the day, I hold a sort of nominalism. Like I think that our categories and our entities are constructs that we invent. So if a person really wanted to press me on my pragmatism, on my compatibilism, I would give it up easily and say, I mean, I can't back any of this up. I'll say that I ultimately don't believe in either free will or determinism. Um, but since I think they're all constructs that we can use, I see no problem in using one or the other when they're relevant, given that they're, all made up in my view. So uh, that's how I look at it. Ultimately, I think neither one of them is true, determinism or free will. But on a pragmatic level, I think they can both be utilized given the context.
Yeah, so I want to make a quick point on the two things there. On the first thing about, well, if someone were to say Putin doesn't have any agency or he didn't cause any things, it's the like Big Bang or something that's really caused. Well, there we might I want to ask is if determinism is true, is there only like one cause, the initial state or something like that, or are there not other causes? Because you might say that it's true that Putin caused it, but there's some prior causes to him causing it and so on, perhaps some ultimate cause of the event in question. And often, and I don't necessarily want to get into talk about causation, but um, just assuming that often people are, when asking for sort of an explanation of some event, they're looking for the proximate or more immediate causes of it, not the more distant or ultimate ones. And that just goes back to the context and what sort of question people are asking. That will fix what sort of answer is appropriate. On the second thing about how, um, like if someone pressed you to defend compatibilism or something, um, you would say, well, I don't. Not strictly speaking, something I believe is true in some um, robust sense. It's just something useful terminology or something like that. Um, well, I would say, I mean, I'm not sure that I would necessarily disagree with that, but I would say something a bit different, which is that, um, look, this is going to come back to the semantic point from before. I'm not going to pretend to say, well, I'm right that free will is compatible with determinism, and you're wrong, unless, of course, we share some common notion of free will, because in that case, the notion that I am using is one which just is compatible with determinism, like by definition, and so they would be wrong to say that it isn't. But of course, in almost all cases, they're not, because they're not using the same notion. That's why I want to say that this sort of dispute is rarely substantive, and um, and so if we were to ask the question, but what really is free will? It's like, is free will really compatible? But that's just like misguided, because there isn't this. We have to make more specific what is meant by free will in that context. If it's meant to be some general neutral notion used by all, there isn't one, right? And if it's meant to be a more specific one, well, then using the specific one that I use, free will is compatible with determinism. Using the specific one that other people use, it isn't, and um, using ones that others use, I think is actually going to be no fact of the matter, because it's sort of neutral with respect to those concerns. So, um, that's how I think. So if you were to ask me, like, demonstrate that or defend your view of compatibilism, I guess there was some other things that I could say about why using it in the way that I do is perhaps practical, or like there's some use for that in everyday discourse, because I think it is useful at capturing talk about deliberated decisions and so on. But that's just some. You can give pragmatic reasons for using terms in various ways all day long, but that's not the sort of support that people are normally looking for. They're looking for something, give an argument that rules out incompatibilism. That's
Yeah,
again um, assuming that what we have is some notion of free will, sort of potentially neutral with respect to whether it's consistent with determinism or not. That's shared, and I don't think we have that.
yeah. So, let's see. Uh, regarding uh, not being able to, uh, well, regarding defending pragmatism by appealing to defealing so, defending compatibilism by appealing to pragmatic uses. It is my opinion, and this is just an opinion, that ultimately that is what we have to resort to with our models. I don't want to rattle off all the trope problems of knowledge and philosophy but some people treat them differently. Some people think they are problems to be solved, or some people, like me, see them as a hint to be taken, to not seek out any definitive establishment, and to just use your devices. And so, to me, it is perfectly acceptable for you to back up your compatibilism, or frankly, either one. If a determinist or an advocate of free will is appealing to pragmatism, that's what works for me. Because if they say that they can establish it as some brute fact, some self-evident truth, or something like that, or that it's true because of some consensus, those to me just blur together into different species of reification, so to speak. And I I'm very sensitive to reification. I don't like people dressing up ideas into something that they're not. And so to me, actually, the only defense is appeal to pragmatism. If I question someone, if I said, "Hey, defend the rules of classical logic," and if you can't, well, I guess Munchausen's trilemma. Then they're just going to laugh and say, "Okay, I don't care. It's so useful," and it doesn't matter. That makes it to where it doesn't matter if the laws of classical logic run into Munchausen's trilemma, because they took the proper route, in my opinion, and they just appealed to the use of the device, and it made this Munchausen's trilemma or various other problems of knowledge non-issues, trifles. But if you take the route some people say the dumb route, in my opinion, which is, they're the laws of logic are these absolute truths that you actually have to use them in order to deny them, and all that tap dance. That to me is problematic. That is the result of people trying to reify their ideas. And so what I'm saying is defending whatever your view is on this issue of free will and determinism by appealing to pragmatism. That to me is perfectly fine. You can take that to the bank. But I know, like you pointed out, there are others who they want an argument, and I'm saying, after, once we establish, if they want a definitive argument, they can start by finding the definitive logic and the definitive theory of truth, so that they can have definitive soundness, and they can let me, and frankly, take their Nobel Prize or whatever it is once they do that.
Yeah, that's good. I was just thinking in terms of the pragmatic appeal, at least on my approach. What I was thinking would be reasonably justified pragmatically would be term usage, right? The fact that I'm using the term in a particular way rather than some other, for example. In general, that's going to be due to pragmatic concerns, either because it's just it fits well with existing discourse, or it's just a phenomena that we want to label in a certain way. There's going to be some largely pragmatic concerns there. I mean, sometimes it's going to be a matter of stipulation and whatever. But because what I'm saying is that what you can think of it as having, you can think of this issue as there being a bunch of different precise views of what the requirements are for a free choice, right? So even among libertarian quote unquote views, which is really just a family of views, you could imagine a whole bunch of precise views of what free will is. And among non-libertarian or compatibilist, or I suppose there's really only one no free will view, although I guess there's a few, since it might depend on what they're denying. Anyway, you could imagine all those different views that, and one, or I guess a few of which, or some vague collection of which might count as what we're denoting by the term free will, right? So you could imagine we have just one word free will, but really we could be meaning free will 1, free will 2, free will 3, and so on. And what I want to say is that I'm fine if we want to have a conversation using one of those more precise usages that are other than what I use. I just want to make it clear that that's what we're using, and then we can sort of answer the question, if we can, whether we have that sort of free will. So if it's going to be some, um, you know, strong libertarian view, I think we don't have that. Okay. If it's going to be something like the sort of thing that I normally talk about when I say free will, I think we do have that. And how we end up talking is just going to be a matter of fact about the discourse we have, the things that the sort of features about us that we are interested in, or the debates that just end up happening for some reason or another. And so I would say that those are perfectly fine debates to be had there, which I just would want to make more precise the notion at the outset, and not pretend as though the dispute is between is a really substantive dispute between people who are saying like, oh, it's compatible or it's not compatible, when usually that's not the case. Usually people are operating with, if only slightly, perhaps more than slightly different notions of what quote unquote free will is. They might have, free will 1 versus free will 2, and they're saying mine is the correct one, and they're saying mine is the correct one. No, there's not that. In that case, I don't think it's a substantive dispute because I have a different notion of mine. And the pragmatic appeal to me is sort of the reasons we might have for adopting one particular usage in general over others. So I think there is a certain pragmatic appeal to a compatibilist usage like I have, although I could imagine the discourse being a certain way in which that pragmatic appeal was implausible. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's how I see how it is. The pragmatic appeal wouldn't be, it's useful to suppose that we have compatibilist free will or something like that. And so that's my support for why I believe that it's true or something like that. No, if you ask me why do I believe that compatibilism is true, well, if you're talking about compatibilism, or sorry, if you're talking about free will as I'm using the term, it's just a straightforward derivation, right? It's consistent with determinism. But if you're asking whether some general notion of free will is compatible with determinism, or someone else's specific notion of it, say some libertarians, well, the libertarian is not going to be compatible with it, of course. And the general notion, I don't think there is a general notion that's like precise enough for that sort of question. So then I would answer differently, right? So, but how I'd answer depends on exactly how the term is being used.
Yeah, and I agree. There's I think just about any issue you look at in philosophy, not just free will, it usually, the closer you look, the more variation there is, and the more you realize it's there's not always a consensus. Now there may be some exceptions, but all the issues that people would point out regarding the vagueness of free will or the idea of agency, I would say I agree with this as being a problem. And I would say we could hold determinism to that same fire. People often think ideas of cause are more simplified than what they are. They don't know how much variation there is on that topic. And I know you said you don't want to get into causality. I don't really
Well, I
either.
will say I just will say briefly, I think a very similar thing is going on with causation. And I think there's a lot to say about how it is that the quote unquote folk or I don't want to say pre-theoretical because that's not quite right. Pre sort of philosophical theory, view, or concept of causation is just nothing like what philosophers end up concerning themselves with in the philosophy of causation. So, at least typically, so like that's just. But this is a problem that's rife in philosophy. They sort of philosophers tend to assume that they're concerning themselves with a notion relevant to an issue that everyday people have at least thought about, causation, free will, morality, and so on. And the theories they're developing are intended to provide an account of what that notion is getting at, and for various reasons that's like rarely the case.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, I guess, let's see. I guess I need to get caught up with the main stage chat, but if anyone wants to raise their hand and come up on stage, you can.
I see
I think we've
TJump.
covered. Oh yeah, there's TJump. What's up, TJump?
Oh, and pessimistic is there.
Oh yeah.
So,
one interesting thing that like years ago when I first started like getting real interested in science and reading up on it, I had this assumption going into it that there's this perfect continuity between the different branches. It was kind of naive, but I thought I had the assumption that chemistry could be deduced from physics and biology could be deduced from chemistry, and so on up the line of complexity.
Yeah, biology just begins where chemistry ends, or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And it was kind of it kind of blew my mind when I found out that this is apparently not the case. Although it kind of makes sense that it doesn't in hindsight. But if someone is maybe trying to ground their materialism, and I don't know, in the natural sciences, I'm just wondering like which layer of complexity are you going to put it in? You're going to put it in physics and say we're all determined by physics. Okay, that's fine. Now, how are we going to explain the all the biological content that apparently doesn't follow deductively from the physics causes that you're talking about? So these problems, in my opinion, don't refute. This doesn't refute determinism. It just, in my opinion, highlights that we need to use these ideas and not pursue them too far, metaphysically speaking. Because we can come up with all the same problems for free will, and so this is why I mentioned a second ago. I said, all the nitpicking we're doing with free will, oh, it's vague, this, that. In my view, we can also do that with determinism, because talk of theories of causes often can end up being as vague or at least varying as theories of truth. So, and like you said, it would be nice to not have to get into that, and I would agree. So, I don't like getting into theories of cause. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think in a way I don't really want to get into it because I think it's even more of a mess than some of the things we've already talked about. That's why I sometimes think about construing determinism, quote unquote. And there's a bunch of ways that term has been used as well. But I like thinking about it in terms of, supposing that there is some correct or at least adequate theory of physics, according to which from some state of the world and the theory, like the laws of evolution of the world and so on, you could deduce in principle any subsequent stage of the world, something like that, right? If you don't need to necessarily bring in some causal notion there, although a lot of people often do.
Yeah.
That, although we might still have some questions about, well, does that make some assumptions about time? Does it make some assumption about like what the laws can tell us? If it's just telling us stuff about fundamental physics at different times, would it also tell us stuff about psychology at different times, potential concerns like that. That's another. It's still a concern, but I think less of a concern than the mess that comes about when we talk about causation, and it's one of really. Sometimes people talk about terms being a term of art or something kind of a term or concept assumed at the outset of some discourse, be it on free will or many other things, that really hasn't been resolved in any significant sense of what it entails or what we mean by it. Because if you look under the hood, it's just a big mess. Like there's nothing really consistent or determinate that we generally mean by the term cause. And you can give a bunch of accounts if you want of what we might mean by it. Like you can engineer a concept, or you can try to fit a concept to the intuitions that we generally have. And there's many different ways that could be done. But there's well, I don't. You're probably going to get some of the things I would say, but I don't. It's just another one of those things where philosophers are going around thinking, let's find out the real theory of causation. Let's get it, it's this sort of difference making account, or it's this sort of counterfactual account, or it's this sort of probability raising. People do all these things, and it's just like there's no way that. I mean, those things that you're talking about might be sensible relations to talk about, or whatever, that maybe capture many of our causal judgments or whatever. But there's no way that our causal discourse, at least generally, is committed to something like one of those counts over the other, generally speaking. Now, it might rule out some, but they're just going way beyond, generally speaking, what I think the discourse sort of permits, if that makes sense.
I had a question about what Gaspar said earlier, something about he had a question for determinists about which level of physics. Like did you
which level of
say that
scientific
again?
theory or something like that?
Yeah, let me clarify. So I had the when I first started reading about science, I had this assumption that chemistry could be deduced from physics, and the higher complexities of science, like biology, could be deduced from chemistry. And I remember reading. I don't remember where it was. This was like in 2010. It's a book and in a chapter on
Just to
philosophy of
clarify,
science.
you mean like if you knew enough physics, you would therefore then know all biology? So like literally, if you just know the current scientific facts, you could then deduce the biological facts? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying like this is like an epistemic statement rather than an ontological one, that if you know physics, you then know biology, not simply that chemistry does ontologically derive from physics, but when you say derive, you mean epistemically, right? Is that what you're saying?
Let me put it this way. The idea that the laws of physics would generate all of the laws of chemistry, and the laws of chemistry would generate, as a direct result, all of the laws, if you want to call them, of biology, and etc. So maybe the former. And I'm saying I don't think this is the case. Okay, I don't think this is necessarily the case, because, well, yeah, and this may not need to be the case. It may not even be a problem. So, yeah.
Because my understanding is that chemistry does follow from physics and biology follows from chemistry, and they all do necessitate one another. It's just obviously you don't have the epistemic means to simply go from the laws of physics to the laws of chemistry, but I think they do ontologically follow.
Okay, so without getting too far into this, my knowledge and expertise in science is very limited. So all I can really do is philosophy of science on this matter. But what I can say is, like if we took, for example, the periodic table of chemistry, and we knew everything there was to know about that, we still don't know everything there is to know about chemistry, because very quickly shape becomes relevant in chemistry, and there's all these macromolecules, and because of shape, this whole world of possibilities opens up. And so, I don't want to necessarily appeal to some kind of emergence. I'm just pointing out that we laid out these rules, and then variations are generated even after the fact from those. And so what I'm going to say is, okay, maybe you want to say that ontologically, you still think there's a continuity of cause, but you're also saying that epistemically we don't have the means to know yet. And so I would say that you're saying that they follow from each other, but we don't yet know how they follow. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So like we can't find a direct link. We can't just know the laws of quantum mechanics and then build chemistry out of that. We don't have a detailed enough view to be able to do that. But it seems like that would happen given what we know about how the chemical things form. It seems to be a result of interactions, just very complex interactions between the laws of physics that lead to those things. They're just very hard to define.
Okay.
Well-
Now, to me, real quick, Detroyer, I want to comment and then I'll let you talk. I understand that that sort of betting on there ultimately being a, let's see, a cause discovered is a perfectly reasonable bet. But if we're saying that we think they follow, but we don't epistemically know, to me, just deductively speaking, that translates to we don't know that they follow. Um, you know, we
That to be
just
like having certainty
expect them to.
deductively.
Well, yeah, the conclusion following as a necessity from the premise. I don't think we're there yet, and I'm saying this isn't a problem. So this isn't some big refutation. It's just, yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I wanted to say something quick because one thought someone might have against the sort of laws of, say, biology being derivable from the laws of physics, supposing both theories were true, so to speak, would be, look, if you list out all the commitments of your physical theory, nowhere in there are you going to have the term, say, molecule, say, for example, suppose. How are you, whereas that term does appear in your biological theory, or at least your chemical theory, how are you going to derive from the set of statements sort of constitutive of your physical theory those statements of your chemical and biological theory, which include the term molecule, right? Where does that term come from? You need some sort of bridge, so to speak, to get to that. And you might think, so I don't know if that concern was clear, but I'll just say quickly, you might think one way to resolve this is that if you include both the sort of meanings of those terms like molecule and what things could fall under its extension, sort of that might be entailed by the meaning and so on. And it might include some facts about the world, and here it kind of gets a bit complicated if the meanings are context sensitive, blah, 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 whatever. Then if you're, I think a lot of people will think that given the physical theory, logical inference, and those kind of semantic or referential facts, you would be able to deduce in principle the chemical or biological facts, assuming that there's nothing kind of spooky going on in the world, such that when you describe the things in terms of biology, it's adding something extra special that's not given already in terms of the same stuff described another way. So I mean, there's a fair literature on sort of what physicalism is committed to with respect to derivation and how these different quote unquote levels of description of the world are related to each other in this way. But that's a couple of remarks that I would want to say.
I didn't
All
understand
right.
the first thing you said about how there's like a problem with the definition or the word molecule. Like,
Yeah.
if we can know that molecules are made of quarks and things, doesn't that just the fact that we made up the word molecule doesn't really seem to follow, or doesn't matter what we call it because we know it's a result of these kinds of interactions that happen. Like, it's just a bond of protons and neutrons that occurs because of the electromagnetic force. Like, that's a molecule.
Yeah, but that's not going to be something. If you listed out, look, if you had a scientific theory, your theory of physics is going to be some collection of statements, perhaps closed under certain consequence relations, whatever. And I want to say that just given that theory, suppose you had something like I don't know, some theory of quantum mechanics or string theory, or whatever we think the quote unquote correct or at least adequate theory of physics is. Um, you're not, there's not going to be a valid derivation of some statement of the form, there are molecules of such and such. That's just a new term that wasn't present at all in your theory. How are you going to derive something of that sort from the initial set of statements?
Well,
It's
it
just not never
seems
going to
like
follow.
certain patterns of protons and neutrons binding together are more likely because the bond is stronger in certain configurations, and so you have a higher percentage of this kind of combination of protons and neutrons, and we can call those higher combinations molecules. So it doesn't seem like it'd be too hard to do that.
Yeah. So what? Of course, the things that you would be able to infer. Suppose the physical theory permits you to infer that. I don't know. At some location, there are these electrons in this arrangement, and protons and neutrons, or fields, or strings, or whatever. Particular arrangements of those, whatever entities are sort of countenanced by your physical theory. And you then say, well, but it turns out that we're just calling that sort of arrangement of those things carbon or whatever, a carbon atom. Then you could say, given that sort of semantic fact, you could infer from there being an arrangement of those things in that way that there is carbon there, right? So if you add in, so to speak, the semantic facts and some extensional facts, because the semantic facts might not determine that it's the carbon is those things arranged in that way precisely. It might depend on some other things. You add in those things, then you can like validly infer from the physical theory and those extra facts uh, some facts given in some other theory. And I want to say, in principle, I'm optimistic that that is kind of true across the board if the theories are true or at least adequate. Um, uh, so, but nevertheless, if you're just given the sort of statement involved in your theory, your physical theory, closed under some consequence relation, you're not gonna on just from that be able to infer statements normally made in some, say, theory of biology or chemistry. You need
Well,
the extra, yeah,
to me, it seems
because
like you're saying that because in biology they start with different primitives, they start with carbon atoms. They had to give that a name because they had an object that they were looking at, and they gave it a name, and then they retroactively tried to figure out what it was made of particle wise. And from a physics standpoint, since that's not the primitive, they're building it up. It wouldn't come to that arrangement necessarily being the same name thing, but they'd still come to the same arrangement having some classification, even if it was a different name. So I don't see why there would be a problem there. It would just be because of the fact that biology or chemistry starts with different primitives. They give certain combinations names because they're already known to be present, whereas physics would have to derive them and figure out which ones would be the most common and most present. But they would still probably lead to the same conclusion that certain, if they knew enough about how they could interact, that carbon would have the most ability to bond in certain ways. And so they'd probably label that as having significance and give it a name of some kind.
so in a certain respect, I agree in that what both of these theories would be entailing about the world is going to be um, similar. I mean, the physical theory might be more specific in certain regards, but um, just with respect to carbon, suppose our chemical theory says there's some carbon atom there, and that's something entailed by our chemical theory, sort of completed theory of chemistry or whatever. And our completed theory of physics says that there's, I don't know, this arrangement of more fundamental particles there. All in terms of what the world is like, so to speak, under these two theories, is the same or perhaps similar enough, but with a different level of specificity. However, the point I was making was kind of consistent with that. I'm just saying that from the physical theory alone, you're not going to be able to derive, and that stuff that's carbon, right? That statement is something you need extra sort of semantic facts or whatever to infer.
What is the information there that you're saying that the pure physics wouldn't be able to discern about the carbon atom other than just its name? Like, because it seems like all of the relations about the carbon atom, like its shape, its structure, the things it can bind to, all of that should be able to be known just by looking at the physics. You should be able to derive all of the laws of chemistry just by looking at the physics if you got a powerful enough computer. So I don't know. I think like all of the facts about the carbon atom should be able to be known just by looking at the physics, other than the fact that the name carbon is something that was made up by biology. So that seems to be like the only substantive difference between the two. What other information would they be missing in that context?
So in terms of what the world is like, so to speak, if you're given a carbon atom, presumably your completed physical theory would be able to tell you, well, at least all of these features of it. I don't necessarily want to say it could tell you everything about it, because there's always different concepts and so on that we could develop and so on. But the point I'm making is quite simple, though. It's still an open question. Okay, you've described it some thing in terms of your physical theory, and you've described it quite well. However, it's still an open question whether the thing you've described counts as what we would call a carbon atom, and whether that does count as what we would call a carbon atom depends on whether that thing, is under the extension of that term, and whether that thing falls under the extension of that term is not something derivable merely from the physical theory. You need some extra facts about, well, what do we mean by carbon atom? What sort of things can satisfy it? And if you, or what the sort of things do satisfy it? And given that and the physical theory, perhaps you can derive it.
Again, I'm not seeing the content that is being missed here, other than the fact we tend to label this like a carbon atom. So if you're saying that the thing that we can't know purely from physics is how people who start from biology tend to label things, like, well, yeah, I agree. That's just a difference in language. But like if an alien race came up with just a physical theory and had no idea about human biology or whatever, they should be able to describe everything about the universe just fine and know all of the relations between what we call carbon atoms and what we call silicon or whatever, and how it fuses or bonds. They probably just don't call them that. So it seems like the only fact that you're missing is just the name.
Yeah, so one of the facts that you're going to be missing is that particular name. There's a variety of other categorizations or relations that you might not countenance in your physical theory or be able to derive from your physical theory.
Like what?
But sorry?
Like what? Like what examples of other things?
Oh, I don't know. You're not going to be able to derive some fact about, say, I don't know, evolution from the basic physical theory, like biological evolution. Again, perhaps you could in principle derive, the arrangement of fundamental particles that will obtain over time, and the arrangements that you're describing turn out to be different generations of various organisms. And as it turns out, when we describe those things in the terms of biology, there you can sort of infer some sort of evolutionary process. But you're not going to be able to infer from the description of those things in the terms of physics alone that what's going on there is what we would count as evolution. Because again, what we would count as evolution, biological evolution, well, we mean something by that term, and it's not something derivable. It's not derivable from the physical theory that what that theory is describing counts as something of that sort. It's just
What
kind
I
of the
keep
same
hearing,
thing, though.
what I keep hearing you saying is just that if you start with a certain level of physics as your primitives and you start labeling things from that primitive, you're going to have different labels for different relations that will not be the same as if you start from a different primitive level. But the description of reality and everything in it could still be known fully, and they just have different descriptions of the same processes. I don't see why there would be a there would be no substantive information they're missing there other than just what group B calls it. So like if I call a tree and I have no idea what people in Australia call a tree, I'm not missing any of the information about the tree. They just have made up a different word for it. I don't see why that would be meaningful in any way other than just we don't know what other people call it.
Look, if all you're saying is something like, if you have the label tree for a tree and someone else doesn't have that label, but perhaps uses some more basic chemical theory in terms of, oh, look, it's a such and such atoms arranged this way, this way. And, their description is adequate, so to speak. Although what that exactly means, we might question. Then that's fine, right? I want to allow certainly that there are many different but perfectly legitimate ways to describe the world, or carve up the way things are, so to speak. And you don't need to use their terminology. They don't need to use yours. It might not suit
Sure.
their purposes, or it might not suit yours. All I'm saying though is that just some fact about what's derivable from one theory to another, and I mean, it's kind of like what goes on.
Let me clarify. So when
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
like say the word biology or say the word chemistry, what I would mean by that isn't the like socially constructed field made by humans. What I mean by that is the physical relations between existing things. And the physical relations between existing things would be known just through the physics, even though our socially constructed field of biology wouldn't necessarily be known. All of the relations that it describes would be known.
Well, so if you're thinking of the relation as like, because I don't want to sound like Gaspar here, but I don't want to reify the relation. I don't think the relation is a. Let's just maybe avoid talking about relations and talk about the things, right? So
What's wrong with sounding like Gaspar?
yeah, I feel that.
Byron.
Nobody wants to sound like Gaspar.
Oh, is that Eddie? I have a really quick question. Can you verify me on reason and religion?
Oh, yeah. Did you send a did you fill out the question and stuff, or?
I think so. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Eddie, I have a question. Can you make me a moderator in there as well?
In reason and
Yeah.
religion?
Yep.
Quick question, Eddie. Can you make me the page owner of the group owner?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have any control over all that. I'm just a little peasant moderator.
Okay. I have
By
a
the
quick
way,
question. Y'all can carry on with this issue as long as y'all want, but I want to ask Tom on this issue of whether the different branches of science can be deduced from physics. I understand that maybe that is the goal, but you're saying epistemically maybe we don't know it yet, and so I would say that means we don't have that deductive certainty we're looking for. But I'm also telling you I don't think that's a problem. How important is this issue um, to determinism? Because I know you're a determinist.
Yep.
You say compatibilism is incoherent, and I want to know this issue of the different scientific fields being deduced from physics. How paramount is that for determinism? Because I would let a determinist off the hook. I don't think they need to establish that to have determinism. But
Yeah, totally.
how
It's
important?
totally unrelated. So like my determinism is based on the argument that everything we do is done for reasons or done for no reasons, and that's ontology independent. So it doesn't matter if there's natural, supernatural, it doesn't matter what level of physics it is, it applies to all of those. So you can be a determinist for completely unrelated reasons to anything about physics or naturalism or physicalism. You can be a determinist and be an idealist. It makes no difference at all.
Okay. See, I prefer that route rather than people trying to ground their free will or determinism in some ontology, because then, they end up having to defend things that ultimately they probably can't defend. So I'm all about, building a big wall, a big Trump wall between, our determinism and free will and metaphysics and ontology. And so I have more of an abstract and purely pragmatic take that Detroyer and I were sort of talking about. We see similar on that issue. And yeah, yours seems to be secularized from metaphysics as well, which I think is probably a good thing.
Thank you. Well, my question was, I thought that was really interesting when you brought up the thing about the distinction between the different levels in physics. But I was trying to understand, I don't understand that there are any facts about the world that if you just approach it from a physical standpoint, facts about chemistry, I don't think in the way that chemistry is describing the world, none of the facts that it uses to describe the world can't be known simply by looking at the physics. So I think that just by starting with the physics, you can know every single fact about the world that you get from chemistry. They're just labeling it differently.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I don't know, because the way I was talking about this was thinking about, okay, what is our theory of physics? It's going to be some set of statements or something like that, right? It's going to be all your theoretical commitments, or at least some base set of theoretical commitments that are with some sort of consequence relations or some way to derive other states given those basic commitments. So, for example, you can have some fact about the wave function and some initial condition, and then you can say, and you can infer, and this is the way it evolves, and so you can infer other states from that. Anyway, and your theory of chemistry or biology is going to be something like that as well, except it's going to involve, you might say, different levels of description. At the very least, it's going to involve different terms and relations that you don't see in the physical theory. I mean, there might be some in common, but there will be some that aren't.
Well, that's the part I'm questioning. So they said you don't see in the physical theory. To me, I think you're still going to see it, all of it. I don't know what you wouldn't be able to see in the physical theory that you would be able to see in the chemistry theory. If take I don't know, Mendel's law or something. If you understand how RNA and DNA form on clay or whatever. So if you solved abiogenesis, or hypothetically, and you could know how it could occur and what the probabilities of it are occurring in the universe given the laws, and know how DNA as one of the different potential kinds of self-replicating molecules would reproduce, and it would reproduce contingent on the other molecules in the environment, you'd know that ones that successfully would reproduce more or whatever. And so you could get the same conclusion as any of the biological laws just by going through the physics. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, so what I'm granting, of course, is that in principle, I think you could sort of adequately describe the same phenomena, like stuff in the world, so to speak, with different theories, or you could have different sort of quote unquote levels of description if you want. You could describe it in the terms of biology. You can in principle describe it in the terms of some more fundamental physics. That I'm not in dispute about. What I am saying is something maybe a bit more technical, which is that given the sort of axiomatization of your theory, you have the theory as a set of statements, and I'm asking, given the sort of consequence relations built into the theory and, I don't know, logic, what can be deduced from that? One thing that you're not going to be able to deduce from your theory of physics is going to be some fact about gazelles, right? You're not going to, in other words, you're not going to have a statement that you can derive from that says, and there are gazelles or something like that, right? Of course, what you can derive is going to be some description of what, in fact, is a gazelle in the terms of your fundamental physical theory, and that's fine. But where you're not going to get is an inference to a statement of the form, there are gazelles, unless you have the additional semantic facts such that you can make that substitution.
Is that important for anything? Like, does the fact that we come up with the
Well-
name gazelle? I mean, it could just by like what's it called? Lucky knowledge. They could just come up with the term gazelle for the same physical
Yeah, so
combination of particles.
you could come up with the term, I don't, come up with some label X. The unfortunate thing though is that really our label of the thing in terms of fundamental physics to coincide with our label of in terms of something not in fundamental physics like gazelle, there's this notorious issue of vagueness, especially in the higher level theory, that's gonna bring some problems for that. But I don't whatever, I don't want to really get into that, although I actually talked about that with the guest the other day. Let's leave that aside. Suppose that you can have some label X, you could say, okay, you have this arrangement of things in your fundamental physical theory, and I don't know, let's label that arrangement X, and it might turn out, that what you're labeling X is what we're labeling gazelle, or at the very least, you could label what we're labeling gazelle X in your physical theory, or you could use the word gazelle, but it's still not derivable just from the theory that what we've labeled X is the same as what the term gazelle denotes. That's something you need. It's the same sort of thing that comes up sometimes when people talk about, Hume and deriving the ought from an is. It's like, if we're thinking about it in this way, if you have a bunch of premises, none of which make any mention of oughts or norms or anything like that, then you're not going to be able to derive a substantive conclusion about oughts or norms, right? You could perhaps derive some tautology involving them, but you can't derive a substantive one because you can't really invent something new in the conclusion that already wasn't there to sort of infer from the premises. And likewise, I think the same thing is going on here. And you might ask, okay, well, what's the significance? Like, so what if it's not derivable from the theory? We're still describing the same things. It's just a different label for it that we have in this other theory. Yeah, that's all fine. It's just that this stuff, this is relevant, especially in the literature and the philosophy of mind, which is people are asking stuff like, on physicalism, you should be able to derive facts about the mind merely from the facts of fundamental physics, and that's where stuff like this comes to be relevant, because well, you have people like Ed Block and Frank Jackson and David Chalmers disputing on whether the phenomenal fact should be derivable from those things. And on one hand, you might think that if you're given all of those facts, then you're also going to be able to derive the sort of meaning and referential facts in principle, and those should be derivable from and therefore all these things should be ultimately derivable from the fundamental physics and blah blah blah. Or you might think that that's not necessary. I don't know. Maybe it's not so interesting, but if it turns out that if you took away, so to speak, all of the entities that our physical theory is committed to, right? All the strings or molecules or fields or whatever, and there was nothing left, so to speak, at least in the cosmos, then that's an adequate physical theory. That's some sort of physicalism. And if you also, then you could say, you could have a description of the sort of world in terms of that theory, but you could also have a description of it in terms of some other theory, and you could have descriptions of particular things in terms of the language of physics or in terms of the language of chemistry or whatever. And really, you're just having different labels for things and different levels of description for them and so on. And that's all fine. I think that's all consistent with what you're saying. I was just making a more basic point about theories and derivability and so on. I don't know. Maybe it's not so interesting, but
it's very interesting, and it makes sense. So some people in the main chat are saying they want to hear what Brute Facts thinks about this topic. Now, Eddie, it's my understanding that as a Christian, you hold to a really hard form of determinism, right? Would you say that?
Hell no. What do you think I'm
Okay.
a Calvin? Come on now.
All right. Tell us what your views are on this topic.
Oh my God, I'm gonna get so jumped on. I'm a Molinist. I think
Okay.
that
What's that?
I think that free will and uh, God's plan are compatible under a Molinist framework. So, given easiest way to explain it, most people say God has natural knowledge, knowledge of himself, and foreknowledge, where he looks out into the future and sees what creatures would do. The Calvinist wants to reject foreknowledge and God's decree to create based on what humans would do because it makes God contingent upon humans. So Calvinists either lean to an exhaustive divine determinism that God determines pretty much everything, or he is the cause behind everything, even though he doesn't necessarily make people do bad things or something like that. And then you have the compatibilists in that camp who think that we do have some, not libertarian free will or anything like that, but some type of what they would call free will on small things, but ultimately God determines everything. Under a Molinist framework, Molina posits a middle knowledge, a knowledge of counterfactuals. God knows his creation and creatures so intimately, he knows what they would do in any given situation, not necessarily looking out and seeing what they did. You know, for example, a crude example would be if I take a plate of Brussels sprouts and a plate of a piece of chocolate cake. I know my daughter well enough. I know she's going to eat the chocolate cake. Now, I don't mean that in a knowledge claim sense. It's just a kind of a picture or metaphor for what middle knowledge is. So, with God's middle knowledge, knowing, for example, if he put Pontius Pilate in the place that he did, he would freely choose to kill Jesus. So, out of the possible worlds that God could have created, um, he chose a world in which his plan would ultimately be completed by the free will choices of the creatures, if that makes sense.
Wait, what? So, so there's infinitely many worlds where we can each choose to do different things. I could choose chocolate or I could choose vanilla, and God just chose to create the world where I choose chocolate.
Um, I don't, I, I don't know if that's contingent upon. I mean, I guess God knew what anybody would do in any given situation, so I guess He did actualize the world to you like chocolate. But I don't know if it's a moral significance. Um, and it may be that out of all the possible worlds, given I think it's planning talks about significant moral creatures and trans world depravity, given creatures with moral significant decisions that he couldn't create, or it wasn't feasible to create a world where everybody chose to do the right thing.
I'm not understanding how you can give someone, like, how anyone can be at fault if there's infinitely many choices they could make, like chocolate or vanilla, murder, not murder, whatever. And the one who chose the world in which they made the decision wasn't them. Because, I mean, if they could have equally chosen either thing, and The determining factor in which one they chose was the world, the classification of the world, like world A, world B, or whatever, that was created. And the one who created the world also chose all the things you were going to do.
Well, that's where yeah, ultimately, so I take a view, which I believe that Molina held to, which is agent causation. Uh, Free will just means it was ultimately up to the agent. And if God knows what all of us would choose to do in any given situation, um, and there's a world to where his plan can unfold with the choices, free choices of creatures, that's just the world that he chose to actualize.
So he created a world. So he had an option. He could have created a world where I chose vanilla, or he could have created a world where I chose chocolate. And he picked the one where I choose chocolate.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, technically, yeah, but I don't think that because you like vanilla or chocolate is why you chose a world where you like vanilla or chocolate. I think it's more about, like moral decisions and, decisions we make along the way in our life.
Yeah, that was just chocolate and vanilla is just an example to replace moral decisions to make it easier, an easier analogy.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
so is the me in both worlds the same me or different me's?
It would be the same you, because on typically on at least in the without endorsing any particular libertarian free will position, which I hate that word, but um it's without endorsing, just it's hold on, I just totally lost my train of thought. I'm ADHD as hell. All right, what was your question again?
Right. So I'm asking, like, if like each person in each world wasn't me, then obviously each person didn't have a choice. They were forced to do the only thing. So in order for them to have a choice, they both would have to be the same person before the choice of chocolate and vanilla. Therefore, um, are they culpable for all of the immoral things they would have done in all of the possible worlds, or only the one that was created by God?
Yes. Okay, I remember where I was. So Molina would say that free will is simply just the ability to choose otherwise. You could have actually chose to do something different, and as long as there's a possible world where you could have chose to do something different, then you have free will. But this is the world that God decided to actualize. No, you're not held responsible for things you could have done in other possible worlds. So it is deterministic in a sense that this is the world that God chose to actualize. But it's based on what we would freely do and in a way that his plan could still come about.
So if I under different circumstances would have made a different decision, like if I'm in world B and I would have chosen to do good, um, and I wouldn't be punished eternity in hell or whatever for this other world, and God chose to make this world and not that one. I mean, I'm determined by the world, which world he chooses to actualize, not my free choice.
Well, you're determined, but yeah, you're limited to the world that God did actualize, but it's not a soteriological system. It's only a system of how God can be sovereign and have his ultimate divine plan, and we can protect his sovereignty and show that free will is possible while protecting the sovereignty. So you can still hold to different soteriologies. It doesn't go as far as to say who's going to be condemned, who isn't, and how they're saved and how they're not, and all of that. It's just a way. It's a philosophical position to try to make sense how Scripture seems to allude to God's plan is going to unfold, yet we seem to be held accountable for the moral choices that we hold to.
Right. So the question here is, for me to be able to do otherwise, that means I have to be able to do the other thing, right? But if the thing I do is determined not by my choice, but by the world in which God chose, that seems to be the opposite of free will again. So it seems like my action is determined by which world I'm placed into. God places me in this world, therefore my action is determined. Because it seems like in this worldview where my actions are determined by which world I'm placed in, like that seems to be no different from determinism in that, like, if you made me a billionaire or whatever, I'm clearly going to make different decisions than if I don't have any money. And so my decisions are equally as determined by my physical state in this universe as it is the spiritual state of God's chosen universe. So I don't see how that's not determinism.
Well, I mean, it's because it's not determinism, because it isn't. You're not being forced to choose things on an outside influence.
Let me rephrase. So, like, if I was in universe B, so suppose naturalism, determinism is true. In universe A, I choose chocolate. In universe B, my brain synapses are in a different way, and I like vanilla, so I choose vanilla. So there are now two universes, and in both one, I can choose one or the other, but which my choice is determined on which universe I'm in. How is that different? And then my choice of killing or not killing or doing a sin or whatever being determined based on which universe God put me in, because it seems the same.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, it's determined in the sense that we didn't have a choice in the world we got to be in, but it's not deterministic in the sense that God made you choose vanilla or chocolate. You still chose vanilla over chocolate or chocolate over vanilla, and there's still a possible world you could have chose the other. Which is, I mean, that's enough for determinism to be false under the view.
Well, how? That's what I'm not understanding. So let's say naturalism, many worlds hypothesis. Say the many worlds hypothesis is true. That means there are other worlds where I chose otherwise, or possible worlds where I would choose otherwise. Does that mean I have free will? Because I, even though everything is determined by the physical states of the universe, in one universe I chose chocolate, in one universe I chose vanilla, because of the physical states in that universe. How is that different from me choosing chocolate and vanilla in God's universes because of the spiritual states in that universe?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I understand what the objection is, but on determinism, traditionally, of course, I know you're familiar with. Traditionally, determinism is that the things we're going to do are determined by factors outside of us. We're going to choose to do these things. There's no agent causation free will there. So
Yep.
even though we are determined for this life to turn out the way it will, because that's the world God chose to actualize, he's not making us, and there's not a deterministic factor there to make us choose these things. It's only by him actualizing this world out of possible worlds.
Well, that sounds like a determining factor. Like if he chose this world and this world I choose option A or whatever, that seems like a determining factor forcing me to choose option A.
Real quick, I have a question. Okay, so Eddie, I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding what your view is exactly. I understand Tom's trying to get clarification on it. You are not pitching a compatibilist view, right? Or because at times this sounds like a compatibilist view to me, but you're saying it refutes determinism, or am I confused?
Technically, it's incompatible.
Okay, and so it's saying that despite God's ultimate, control and plan that is determining things, we have this agency or choice that why is that why is that not determined?
Right, okay. Let me think of a clearer way to put it. So determinism would be that we don't have, so when we chose to do X, there's not a possible world where we could have chose to not do X, because that's what the libertarian free will argument is. We could have done otherwise. Given everything that happened in this world, we could have chose to do something different than what we did. And that's what the free will person says. And determinists or compatibilists would say,
Wait,
no.
say that again. So you said determinism is the position that there isn't a possible world where we made a different decision, something like that?
Yeah, we couldn't have chosen Y over X. We were determined to choose Y and didn't have a choice in choosing X,
Well,
not even in another possible world.
Do you think any naturalist thinks that's the case, or do you think they agree that under a different possible set of physical circumstances, we'd make a different decision?
Right. Well, that's the thing is, I'm talking about given everything that's happened the way that it has, there is a possible world where I could have chose something different than what I did. But the determinists would say, given everything exactly the way it is leading up to now, we could not have chose to do different.
Yes. So if God chose world A, there's no way, it's not logically possible for me to make a decision that would be in world B, because God chose world A. There's no way in world A for me to choose otherwise.
No, not in this world, but there is a possible world with the exact same scenario that you could have chose to do the opposite.
So there's a determining factor. God chose a world, and because God chose that world, in this world, there's no way for me to choose otherwise.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We're limited in this world because this is the world that got actualized. But there is a possible world that the world is exactly like it is now, and we chose to do something different, which is what free will would be. Because the determinist says there's not a possible world, given the set of circumstances it's happened all the way up until now, that I could have chose to do something different.
I wouldn't say even all determinists say that, because you can still grant that every particle up until this point has gone the exact same, and then due to like quantum randomness or something, it changes. Like there's a possible world where the quantum randomness decays in one way and one where it decays in another way, and you're still determined by the physical states in the universe.
Well, if there's randomness, then determinism can't be true.
I don't think so. I think even if you say it's random or determinism, neither of those is still free will. So you could still say that it's random and you still have no free will.
Well, the only reason I say that is because usually the objection by the determinist is, well, then it's random, which is, it seems to be, in my experience, something that a determinist wants to avoid.
I'm fine with randomness as long as there's not free will, because I think free will is the problem. Determinism and randomness are both fine. So I don't see any difference between the universe you're positing and a universe with quantum mechanics. Does quantum mechanics give us randomness in a naturalistic universe, or give us free will in a naturalistic universe?
I think it gives us probabilistic and not deterministic universe.
But free will, does it give us free will?
Well, I mean, if the universe is probabilistic, then how could we hold to creatures being determined?
Well, do you mean, is there any difference between randomness and free will to you?
Yeah, I would say randomness is a potential blow to free will, because under free will, at least under agent causation, we want to say the agent's responsible for it. But if randomness is possible, then it could have been a totally random decision, which I think would deal a blow to free will.
All right, based on the definition of free will you gave, the ability to do otherwise in some other possible world, randomness would fit that definition, and so we would have free will based on that definition in a random world.
Can you state that different? I kind of got
you defined free will as the ability to do otherwise in some other possible world given the fact that all the previous states are the same.
Mhm.
So if randomness is true, then it would fit that criterion. So it fits the criterion that it's possible for us to do otherwise, even if all the physical states in the past are the exact same because of randomness. But if you're just defining that as free will, well, then randomness is free will by that definition, unless there's something else in the definition there.
Well, no. Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. No, that's why I was. So there are several different positions on libertarian free will. I just think that agent causation is the least getting in the mud and the weeds with it. I would say it's up to the agent, and there's not randomness there. It's the agent evaluating, consequences and rewards and things of that nature. I wouldn't say there's a randomness to it. Now, if we want to reduce it down to something quantum or biological or something like that, then I would say that one could try to argue that it's just randomness. But I think agent causation is just sufficient for free will.
I have a question real quick. Okay. All right. This is for Tom. Okay. So Tom, your view of free will is, again, it is sort of abstracted from ontology. And can you give me that quick statement you made about, determinism? Can you tell me what your view on determinism is again?
What, like, I'm okay with anything if it's caused by previous reasons or it's random, and either one of those is fine for my determinism.
All right. Okay, that's fine. And so, yeah, and the nice thing about this is it doesn't have the baggage of being grounded in any kind of ontology. If someone just decides to just go with agent causation for their free will, and if they don't give into any pressure to try to ground it in any kind of ontology, what would you say is the problem with this?
The problem with what Eddie said would be that it seems like there's no difference between determinism and God choosing universe A. So, like, it doesn't seem like the case that you choose anything. You don't get to choose. It's a superficial choice. It's like you choose literally everything, all possible worlds. You choose literally everything, and then God's going to pick which choices he wants you to do in this world. So it seems like it's avoiding the issue. So it's like saying, if you make all of the possible choices and then God chooses the choices that he wants you to make, that doesn't seem to be in any way not determinism. So it's like if a programmer says, my robots, I can program it in infinitely many ways, but I'm going to program it in this way. And another programmer says, I'm going to program it to do literally everything, and then I'm going to delete all of the ones I don't want. How are those different?
Okay. So then let me very quickly just try to explain what Detroyer and I were talking about before you got on stage.
Well, hold on. Before you get back to that, can I real quick?
All right. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I just thought of maybe a thought experiment that might illuminate it better. So let's say I'm building a maze, and I have an unlimited possibility of mazes I can build, and I create a avatar or something that's going to go through this maze. My goal is for the avatar to make it at the end of the maze, coming out the spot I want them to. But I know every decision they're going to make along the way. So I can build the maze in a way that they're going to choose this certain path, but yet come out at the end where I want them to come out. That seem to make sense?
Yes, it does. Whether or not that's a view that I or others hold, I at least understand what you're saying.
Right, but what also you got to so it's not necessarily a view. I don't view it as a view between. Well, first of all, I wouldn't expect a naturalist to accept it. because it is a philosophical position, but it's about theology. You know, how can we protect God's sovereignty and still, you know, be held accountable by God for the things that we do? And that's all it is trying to make, you know, using a philosophical position between these two things that seem to be clear in Scripture. If I wasn't a theist, I don't know if there's any way to hold to any kind of free will. The only reason I think that at least the illusion of free will is true is because how can you hold people accountable if they don't have free will? At least from a cosmic sense, I'd be a compatibilist. I'm very
So,
sympathetic to
I'm,
compatibilism.
I'm still struggling with, like, so if there's a maze, if I build a maze and there's like I'm just gonna build a straight line, not make any deviations. There's a straight line. Rat can go in one direction, and if I close all the doors behind it and literally force it to go in one direction, is the rat freely choosing to go in the direction that I forced it to go?
No. That's why. No. Not under that scenario. That's why I'm saying I know no matter what maze I build, which way the avatar is going to choose to go. So if I, let's say I know that there's a choice of a left turn or a right turn, I know they're going to make a left turn. So then I'll build a maze from that left turn. And then if they have a choice from going forward, left, or right, I know they're going to go forward. So then I'll put it forward. And
That seems to fit into my other analogy. So my first analogy is suppose I have a robot and I'm going to program the robot and I just program it to go where I want it to go. Second option, second programmer says I program it to do literally everything. I just program it to do every possible decision, and then I build walls so that it'll go in the correct decision. Or if I delete the incorrect decisions or I pick the correct maze so it makes the correct decisions I want it to make. How are those different?
well, because I think if you put anything there to steer them, you're directing them by putting the path out before them to go a certain way. That's causing them to do it. But if you do it according to how you know they're going to choose to go, well, then you're just laying it out in the way that they're going to choose to do it to where it ultimately ends at the end goal where you want it.
Okay, I want to
But real quick,
maybe. All
yeah,
right.
you can go on. But TJump. So there, I mean, there is a major, even under the theology and philosophy of this particular position amongst theists, is what's called the grounding problem. You know, how can God have a knowledge of counterfactuals? How do you ground that? So that's the biggest issue, and the one that keeps me from just wholesale buying into Molinism, because you know, if God knows all true propositions, or all knowledge there, you know, that is true or is to come, how can he know something that's not actualized because it's not a true proposition? And
Although,
the grounding problem is kind of what open theists and Molinists have to deal with.
yeah, I mean, the way I would put it is that, and that's not, I don't know if it's necessarily how the grounding problem goes. It's just that the relevant counterfactuals, given the commitments of the Molinists, there's no fact of the matter about whether they're true or false. So it's not even that God, the question of how God knows them. They're not even like true or false to be known, right? Or at least they're not true. If they're, you could say that if they're, you know, they're, if there's no fact of the matter, then they're just false or something like that. But
Well, that just is what the grounding problem is. So how can God know counterfactuals? There's nothing. There's not a true proposition there. I mean,
well, but you might, because there's two separate but maybe related problems. One of them is, okay, there are these counterfactuals, but how would God know that it's true? It's a slightly different problem from, for these counterfactual statements, are they even true in the first place? And I want to say no, right? So, and that's kind of a more fundamental issue, right? There just isn't a fact of the matter about had God created the world this way, given libertarian freedom, that you would have chosen banana bread or not chosen banana bread on some occasion, assuming that's a libertarian free choice. That's the kind of factual. There's just no fact of the matter about whether that's true. Right.
Well, yeah, but that's just that's kind of I mean it's an inference of possibility to solve a philosophical quandary. I mean we do that all the time.
Just to clarify, the reason I'm
I don't
bringing this
understand.
objection isn't about the ground. I don't really care about the grounding problem. Well, my issue is that it seems to me that the methodology being employed is fallacious reasoning that could be employed in any case in order to try and make some property or whatever. If you think there's some property that has some negative value and you want to eliminate the negative value of the property, you're simply just assuming that it's like a universal and applies to everything, and then just add a new thing, which is just negating it. And then poof, you now have solved the problem. And it seems like that's just a fallacious reading that could apply to literally anything to solve any problem you wanted it to. So
Well,
it seems like here,
then compatibilism's fallacious.
what
I said compatibilism's fallacious then.
I'm not following. So to me, it seems like you're saying that no, the penguin, it's on the paper, it's not black paint and white ink, it's white ink and black paint. Haha, problem solved.
Yeah.
And it seems like you could do that with anything. The properties of the penguin are going to be the same either way. And so the problem has nothing to do with which color ink you're painting with and what color the canvas is. It's still going to be equally as much a penguin either way. And so saying that somehow you're not determined because God used white ink on a black canvas seems gibberish. It seems like just using a logical fallacy
Yeah.
in order to try and make an argument that can't hold. So I'm trying to understand, how does changing the color of the paint and the color of the canvas in any way affect the determined value of the person here? Because to me, it doesn't seem like it does nothing. It does literally nothing to say that we make literally every decision in every possible world and God just omits the ones he doesn't like.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a failure of Molinism. I think it's a failure of my ability to articulate it properly. Because I know, I have the framework, the everything that's there, but trying to articulate it in a way that's which I readily admit it was it was an idea for me. It was really hard for me to kind of wrap my head around all of it. So I would chalk it up to probably my failure of articulating it more
Well, I
than.
don't think so, because I've talked to a lot of people with this and I'm pretty good at steel manning position. So I don't think you would be at fault here. I'm pretty sure it is just literally a fallacy of reasoning that this idea of open theism is using here to try and essentially just evade the issue by changing the color of the paint and the color of the canvas, to use the analogy. I'm not sure how to express it better yet because I haven't talked about this with many people, but I think it's definitely not your fault. Like this is the same thing I've had with a lot of other people expressing the same issue.
Yeah, well, I don't want to keep derailing it. I know Gaspar wanted to say something, but I mean, isn't that what we do in philosophy though? If we have positions, we and there seems to be issues in those positions, we try to solve the issues or we abandon the positions. I mean, I don't really see it being fallacious. I think it's trying to make a working view of it, and if you can't make a working view, then you should just abandon it.
Yeah, but that's only if you can actually solve the issue. So to me, it doesn't seem like you've solved the issue. To me, it just seems like
Okay.
you've rebranded the issue. So that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
if you say the penguins on the paper, well, it's just white paint on a black canvas versus a black canvas on white paint. It's still a penguin. You've changed nothing.
Yeah.
It's still literally a penguin, and so you haven't changed the penguin at all.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, that is one of the areas that took me a while to kind of try and get my head around too, is how is that particular view not deterministic if we don't have a choice in the world that God actualized? We don't have a choice in the worlds, but it really comes down for my the different people that I've read on this, Molina and others, that it's really, I think it's more semantic than really. I think it's just it's something that goes against the typical meaning of free will, determinism, and those things. But at the end of the day, I mean, I can totally see how it seems like it's deterministic either way, because we didn't have control over any of, what's created, which world, or anything like that.
I see. So one thing I want to say is, I made this stage to talk about determinism and free will, and it seems that between Tom, Brute Facts, Detroyer, and I, we've covered all the possible, or at least all the conventional positions of free will, determinism, and compatibilism. So that's pretty cool, in my opinion. Yeah.
Now, all I need to wrap the night up is for y'all to tell me that.
You're right.
No,
I agree. I'm ready to convert to Jesus.
No, you all love sin and you hate God. I mean, that's the bottom line.
I am
know
obsessed with my sin, and that is why when you talk about Jesus, it repulses me, and I want to escape into a world of debaucherous pleasure.
You're
to avoid
suppressing the knowledge of God.
That's right.
That's it.
In my own
God. You really
righteousness.
know God exists, Gaspar. You know He does.
Yeah, and I because I'm such a deranged pervert, I deny it.
I literally had a conversation on Clubhouse this morning about with other Christians about this idea of people suppressing the knowledge of God. It just aggravates the shit out of me when I hear that. I ain't
it's
gonna go.
to me it's a desperate tactic. I prefer, and this is maybe a logic centric alignment, is that I prefer to take someone's position in their exact words as they put them. I do not want to steelman them. I don't want to shoehorn, or I don't want to say what I think their ulterior motives are.
Mhm.
I want to take them as they're presenting themselves, because frankly, if I come up with a bunch of conspiracy theories about what their ulterior motives are, that is a case that ultimately maybe I can't make.